On this edition of Public Interest, controversy surrounding the Annie Palmer-themed costume worn by Miss Jamaica Universe 2019 at the international competition. Does this teach us a lesson about our history? The 1998 historic qualification for the World Cup has not been repeated by our male footballers since. Why doesn't the development of the sport match the enthusiasm of local football fans? I am Andre Jebinson, and Public Interest starts right now. While the world has been talking about the South African beauty who was crowned Miss Universe this weekend, the Jamaican Queen is stirring a conversation locally. Her costume, based on Annie Palmer, the so-called White Witch of Rose Hall, has been deemed inappropriate by some. Others don't mind it. But was it insensitive to our history? That's what we're looking at for the first two segments of the program. We have with us lecturer in history, Dr. Carl Watts, and director and senior lecturer in the Institute of Caribbean Studies, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair, both from the University of the West Indies. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, let me get from both of you your understanding of who this character, who this person of Annie Palmer was and how she fits into Jamaica's history. Starting with you, Dr. Watts.
All right, Annie Palmer for me is, well, the story of the White Witch of Rose Hall is just fantasy, right? The story is almost ridiculous, in my opinion. But it is historically the main basis for it. Our story is based on this character who did exist, Annie Palmer from Hanover, who married a certain individual who owned the Rose Hall Great House, and so on. But as an individual, as a Jamaican, you do realize that over time, the stories regarding the White Witch of Rose Hall, which was basically emphasized or cemented by the novel by H.G. Delisle. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, so that novel obviously helped to spread the fantasy about this so-called White Witch, which has no basis in fact. But it's an interesting story, it's an appealing story. Many people would have inherited this story throughout the years, and here we are. Basically.
Dr. Nair.
Annie Palmer, a character of notoriety, so much so that she has been taken up in fictional accounts of the history in series outside of Jamaica, such as Outlander. There are episodes in that series based on this history with Annie Palmer as a character. So she fits into this larger-than-life representation of Jamaica. And I think that goes hand in hand with the Port Royal and the notoriety in terms of pirates, the kind of ways in which representation becomes not just, in a sense real, but certainly imagined. And I think that whatever it is we want to say, this Rose Hall Great House, Annie Palmer, the character, the ways in which that tour of the Rose Hall Great House is even managed. It includes these stories, these fictional stories about Annie Palmer as a character. And it's very much a part of our heritage.
So let me get then from both of you. Do you have a problem with the Annie Palmer themed costume being presented the way it was at Miss Universe on the weekend? Because that seems to be where, because I mean, the Annie Palmer story has been around for quite a while, but it was never discussed this way until this weekend. So do you have a problem with how it was used?
Well, like Dr. Dr. Nair mentioned, we're looking more at the story of Annie Palmer as it relates to heritage, more so real history, right? Well, I teach Intro to Heritage Studies in my department. And in it, we do emphasize there are heritage represents like legacies from the past and so on. So this story or stories about this particular female we would have inherited throughout the years So in terms of identification with this particular character, many people do have a sense of who she was in that fictional sense. But in the case of the politics of heritage, in terms of representation, what it is, what does it mean to be Jamaican, right? Technically, how it's represented to me, based on what I've read about it and based on the justification by the organizers and so on in terms of this discussion about Jamaican history, it didn't come across to me as an official representation of Jamaica if you're looking at it from the real side of it.
Yeah, but part of their justification was that, there are many different elements of Jamaican folklore, heritage, history that we've depicted over the years at these competitions, and we've used them in pantomime and Anansi, for example, even though Anansi is a fictional character. And so they wanted to put something differently out there, something more creative than, the regular bandana, ackee fruit and all of that. So you don't buy any of that argument?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Technically, there's no right or wrong because it's part of our heritage. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying, based on what she represents, what we associate with Rose Hall in Jamaica, based on because I did the tour recently of the Great House, it is, you don't associate it with something celebratory or positive. It's more haunted stories, trick or treat, Halloween time, night tours, those kind of things. You don't get a sense that this is a positive representation.
You agree, Dr. Naya?
I am, as a specialist of cultural studies, steeped in an understanding about representation and how the politics of not just heritage, but also the politics of a competition, such as the Miss Universe competition. On the one hand, we are dealing with the representation of Jamaica on an international stage, where there's going to be the name Jamaica is going to be called yet again. So there's a reason why we enter these competitions. And there are people who have thoughts about whether we should be entering these competitions or not, and these beauty contests, what do they really mean? But the fact is, this is a platform that is based on a representation from the world, and Jamaica happens to be in that lineup. Not all countries get represented or send contestants to these things. So all right, so that's the first level. One, it's an international platform. Second of all, what do people know Jamaica to be? Mostly, Jamaica is represented as a tropical paradise. When you talk to people in South America, for example, they consider Jamaica to be part of the resort Caribbean. So there's a way in which the world expects Jamaica to be represented. But when you look at the gown and you think about the politics around the sponsorship for that competition and the gown, the contestant in particular, Rose Hall Great House was part of that sponsoring apparatus. So there is a way in which the organizers have, certainly honored the sponsoring entity to be able to represent Rose Hall, the Great House. And so if you think about Rose Hall and representing Rose Hall, it's kind of logical for them to use a character of notoriety such as Annie Palmer. And so I don't see a wrong or right. I think my opinion is quite controversial, actually. Nothing was wrong with the costume. I had no challenges at all. I think the only tragedy was, okay, so what research really went into this construction of the costume? Did it really represent what a fictional character such as Annie Palmer would have been wearing in that time? I don't know. I haven't spoken to the organizers and I haven't spoken to the person who designed the costume. So for me, the larger question is, in what ways are we now thinking as a nation independent for over 50 years? In what ways are we going to be looking at our history and trying to excise, because I think that's the conversation I hear, that we don't really want to be associating with the negative aspects of our history. All colonial histories are problematic. And I think that we as a nation have to understand that even when we wear, whatever fashion it is that we're wearing, there are some ways in which even the very shoes, they are produced in sweatshops. There are ways in which every single thing now, if you really want to be PC, politically correct about most things, you might find that you can't wear certain clothes, you can't wear your glasses. They are produced in sweatshops. We're really troubled as a people now, you know, because if it's not our history that's a problem, it's some contemporary company, it's climate change. There are all kinds of things that will bother us. But as a nation, we have to determine how are we going to treat with our history. The fact is that Rose Hall is a heritage site. Mm-hmm. Rose Hall Great House is a heritage site. It's not going to stop being a heritage site tomorrow. We're going to continue to have people attracted to the story and notoriety of a character such as Annie Palmer, however fictional. And we just have to determine that, yes, people can dip into any aspect of the heritage to represent Jamaica. All
right, so we're at the break, but when we come back, let's talk about something that your colleague said, well, both of your colleagues. This issue of great houses and how we sell this product out there, because we in essence sometimes glorify great houses when they actually represent probably a very dark period in our history. So we'll pick up on that conversation when we come back from this break.
Our slogan says we are the people's station, and for more than 10 years, PBCJ has been providing unique content to this growing market. Let us show you how we can serve you. We are small compared to our competitors, but it's our size that gives us the ability to dedicate ourselves to our clients. We move your project from concept to completion, keeping our activities in-house so we can make decisions in a timely and efficient manner. We have a creative, energetic, and youthful team ready to take your ideas to the next level. So what can we do for you? PBCJ has mastered the art of feature presentations, studio interviews, and PSAs. We also stand ready to create content for your social media platforms and make your message accessible anywhere, anytime. We also provide streaming for your conferences, seminars, and workshops. And guess what? You don't have to break the bank, because our fees are some of the most competitive in the market. And just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we air it free. You heard right. We air it free for you. So call the PBCJ at 876-754-7225 or email us at production@pbcjamaica.org. We are waiting to serve you.
Welcome back to Public Interest. I am Andre Jebinson. We're speaking about the controversial costume, the Annie Palmer themed costume that the Jamaican representative wore this weekend at the international competition in the United States. And before we went on break, I'd indicated we want to speak about this issue of the tourism that we sometimes sell to people, the great houses. We see them all across the island. We invite people to come and tour from overseas. We take schools there to actually tour them. And then we're saying, some people are saying this is glorifying a very dark period in Jamaican history. So why are we taking people to these, polishing the furniture and showing people just about what was happening back then? And you seem to want to pick up on that, Dr. Stanley Nair.
You know, I was recently given a tour of one of these country homes in the UK, and the ways in which those country homes now being acknowledged as spaces that have benefited from the proceeds of slavery. The conversation in those spaces, they're a little bit more advanced, I would say, than the ones we're having here, because we haven't gotten to the point yet where we're talking about the great houses in Jamaica and the fact that they really represent a dark period in our history. But yes, they do represent a very negative part of our history. It's the colonial past, and like I said, all colonial histories are problematic. Our history is complex. These great houses are spaces that I wouldn't say they're celebrated, but they're certainly recorded in the annals of what constitutes, the Jamaican heritage. And I think we have to look at ourselves and determine whether we want to celebrate that history or not.
Should we celebrate that history? Well, let me quote you what Professor Shepard is had said on radio. She said we should not be highlighting great houses because they represent places of exploitation. And so this brand of tourism should, she said this brand of tourism actually doesn't pay enough regard to our history. And so we shouldn't be selling this in our schools, and we should think about how we convey this kind of history to some of our students.
Right, we still have to teach the history.
Yeah.
That's crucial. But in terms of celebratory or positive, the spaces themselves represent something in the landscape and so on, the aesthetic expressions that have come to inform how we idealize the place or the spaces. My issue is that I did the tour of the Great House, for instance, recently with the History and Archaeology Society, and it came across as not authentic in terms of the representation and the discussions that they were trying to evoke. It was more, to what extent could they scare you, right? So historically, great houses, I agree with her in terms of the discussions that need to take place. Instead of it being a site where people come along now just to be scared, based on stories that weren't real in the first place, and how they convey the message in a heritage sense is not necessarily accurate in the first place historically. But why not have real discussions about what these spaces actually represented in terms of the tours, or you conceptualize a tour of a great house, right? In that sense, no, it could still work as heritage-based tourism or a means to inform us
about
if you do
that, isn't part of the mystique, the fantasy and the imagination that we've crafted over the years, isn't that what gets people to come to some of these places? Because people hear about Rosal, and so they want to go there and say...
That's where heritage has to be divorced from history in this sense. Because heritage is not necessarily always historically accurate. So in that sense, yes, you can sell it. It is a story that was passed down. It is a legacy from Delisa, from even as far back as the 19th century, this story. Even though the poor woman, well, I'm not saying poor, but she was like a middling to poor white who died in 1846, at least 15 years after the events are said to have taken place. But yeah, so technically, in this sense, we have to divorce the heritage from the history. Now, if we want to combine the two, where we do these tours now, we have to authentically represent what life was like on the estate.
So have we failed in...
So that's negative.
Have we failed in separating those two? Because...
No, we are failing balancing those two. It's not the separation that we're failing.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, we're saying that where Rose Hall Great House is concerned, the tour is not necessarily informed by an accurate representation of that history. So that heritage in this context, even though heritage doesn't always represent history, it isn't always informed fully by history and can include fictional accounts. The fact is that in this case we are saying, and in the context of the larger conversation about the great houses, let us balance the conversation to have the fiction be informed at least or buttressed by some of the factual elements of the history.
So
that would redound well for our heritage product, because I don't know, this has something then to do with the ways in which we're doing research in history and also informing the teaching of history, and also then the context of the heritage that we're preserving in Jamaica.
Right, because that's part of what the organizers of Miss Universe Jamaica was making, because they're saying this will get more people to read and see that what you know about Annie Palmer probably isn't necessarily the case, or maybe you just need to be more informed about what Annie Palmer is actually about. So do you think that this competition or this costume actually will cause people to look at this and think about what exactly are we selling when we speak about Annie Palmer?
The stories are already there. We know the stories. I'm just saying, when they said here, obviously we have succeeded in this mission as more people are now talking about this aspect of Jamaican history. Right?
I don't know that was really a mission, but they've said that, so we have to take them at their word.
So you're thinking it was...
No, when I went on the tour, I'm telling you, the only thing the students took from them was the slave lover called Taku. Right? You don't forget that name, Taku. Right? And then when you go on the bus and you're going back home, that's all you're talking about. You're not really trying to interrogate, was this real? Was it, you know? It's an experience.
So there's
They have
something
been
about
haunted.
the tour that is not informed by the history itself, is what we're saying.
Okay.
It's sensationalized.
Right.
And in fact, you know, I was having a conversation with Vereen earlier that this is now a sexploitation kind of narrative as well. You know, that it's not just an oppressive history. It's not just a history of exploitation, but it's also a history of exploitation where sex is concerned. That these lovers, fictional or otherwise, they were brutalized, you know, in some cases murdered, husbands killed, according to the narrative,
And
right?
the lovers as well, right.
So that the Great House, in the case of Rose Hall, but also the other great houses represent spaces of like exploitation.
Do you find that we're probably at a point where there is maybe less appreciation for our history? Because, I mean, I listened to you earlier, and it seemed that the organizers of Miss Universe just stumbled into this costume simply because, you know, she's from...
Of the sponsorship.
The sponsorship.
But ironically, before the tour, on the tour, they actually do say, they emphasize on the tour that the dress or the colors that she preferred were red. So when I saw it for the first time presented in all white, I was confused.
Yeah, so what I was asking, if you find that there's probably a decline in the appreciation of our history. When I was speaking to someone about it, they were saying, you know, they could easily call this costume a carnival costume and say it's from Jamaica. And I'm saying, no, we can't do that because carnival really isn't from Jamaica. So people don't really have that historical basis sometimes for doing some of these things.
I agree with you, because there is a way in which the costume, the whole context for these costumes, I'm saying the politics of it has to be understood. I think it's totally informed by the sponsorship. And that, you know, I heard some people on social media, for example, saw them writing about the fact that this costume could have been worn by Miss Iceland. It could have been worn by any other contestant. It really represents Jamaica, except for the story that was told about the fact that it represented this character, Annie Palmer. And that I did not have a problem with. Conceptually, I don't have a problem with a costume being inspired or taking its cues from some character of notoriety in Jamaica. Yes, there are contexts in which we have to figure out historically what was correct, how we are teaching this history. And I think that's a larger, more important point for me, that when we teach our children in school about this history, it must at least have some semblance of accuracy, and it also must represent in its finest detail what is accurate about the period of exploitation, oppression, colonial encounter, and also what was positive, and also where we need to be looking as a nation. Because in some countries you go to some countries, they're not teaching you some aspects of the history because they want you to be certainly conscientized in a particular way.
All right, so what do we take from this discussion going forward in the final minute?
Well, for me, history is very important in terms of self, you know, understanding of self and of the wider society. Until we accurately pinpoint who we actually are as a people going forward, then we will not be able to move or to progress in a unified way. Because our Creole culture, for instance, now we are always at odds now. Annie Palmer is a part of our history, our heritage, right? And we run with it because it's something we inherited from a bygone era, right? But in terms of understanding the finer details, the truth, to get closer to the truth, we need more understanding of our history. We haven't gone as far as, say, Trinidad in terms of knocking down all representations of colonialism and slavery. We haven't gone that far because of that Creole, that unique Creole cultural mix that we have developed. So we have to be more mindful.
I think there are just aspects of our history that we haven't faced. And as a people, the importance is about identity. That's the reason we want to understand history. Marcus Garvey told us in very eloquent terms, people without knowledge of their history, like a tree without roots. And I think, yes, the conversation is about the politics of that history. Where are we in terms of the representation of that history? But as far as the costume is concerned, there's a whole other politics operating there. And I think we ought to understand that there are certain imperatives that would drive some people to want to represent Jamaica in that way.
So we think, I know we're out of time, but you think at this point that we maybe have a crisis of identity. We're not sure exactly who we are and what we stand for. Right?
We know who we are, but we don't have some things that are giving us the proper foundation.
Like what?
And part of that is the teaching of history.
Teaching, okay.
So that we understand ourselves. When we go outside of Jamaica, Jamaicans represent themselves as Jamaicans and they understand who they are. But when they're home and not have anything to struggle for, and you know, just very matter of fact with the history, because we're not buttressed by that real solid understanding of our history.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, both of you. We're going to take another break of public interest. When we come back, we're going to talk about football. We see a lot of excitement surrounding schoolboy football, but then when we get to the national level, it's a different story. So stay with us on public interest. So Jamaicans are passionate about football. Just look at the hype surrounding the recently concluded schoolboy football competitions and other international competitions. We're excited even when we don't have a stake in a match that's being played. So why aren't we better at the sport? And so for that discussion, we have with us in the studio Roy Simpson. He's the team manager at the Jamaica Football Federation, and sports medicine specialist Dr. Paul Wright. Welcome to the program. I generally start the program by a discussion like this by asking for an assessment of where you think we are with the sport of football.
I yield to the doctor.
Well, both of you have to go at some point.
And I think it's a very important topic. I think it's a very relevant topic because, in my opinion, we're not serious about football in this country. To develop football, you have to start from an early age. And you start at the early age by developing the technical skills, the heading, which we are going to outlaw very soon, the passing, the trapping, and able to get the ball into position. So we start off with that, and we have academies. We have academies throughout the island, and we have some in central Jamaica, some in eastern Jamaica, where we have children going to learn those skills. And then, strangely enough, we turn over football to the schools. And the schools have a job to prepare children for life, where football is extracurricular, a part of the whole package that they're supposed to develop in children. And when that is over, we switch back now to get them to go into the professional ranks and to now develop their skills to the point where they can compete internationally. And that to me is haphazard. That is jumpy. What you need to do is to have a program that develops the child, gets him into the skill sets that he's going to need. Then you teach him how to play with other people, how to admit, how to accept defeat, how to accept victory, and how to get the ball from one end of the goal to the other end of the goal. And then you can't, in the middle of that, take him out of that and put him in school, where his priorities change. And when his priorities change, and he's now not able to go into football as a career, you put him back into life, missing some of the skill sets that he should have had at school. But because of his preoccupation with football, he has missed those. Because in order to play football in school, you have to average 40%, which can help you in life.
All right,
And
I'm
that's
going
my
to
problem.
come back to that point.
Yeah.
But let me get from you first, Mr. Simpson, where you think we are. Because, I mean, when you drive across Jamaica, Sunday morning, Friday morning, Sunday morning, people playing football in the field. Saturday evening, you're driving through communities, they're playing football in the road. But yet, at some point, we don't see that level of enthusiasm translated into international football.
I don't know if when you say you don't see it transferred into international football or why we are not better at what we're doing, who you're comparing us with. Everybody said we went to the World Cup in '98, that many years ago, like 2 decades ago. But I think Doc alluded to some critical points why we're not at the place where we're at. But then again, I asked the question, are we a football-loving country, or we just play the game recreationally, Because the thing is, if you're going to do the comparisons in terms of the bigger nations, we're not there yet. But if you compare us from a regional angle, we're there in the sense that we have been to the World Cup. We're now ranked, as the top team in the Caribbean. We're now 4th in CONCACAF. Now you're looking at where we placed. For example, you go back-to-back Gold Cup finals. You missed out in the semi-final, the last edition. So if you look at us internationally, we are getting players out, not getting players as many players as you want in the bigger leagues to get them to get that kind of core where you have more players playing like at a Leon Bailey level, Mariappa to a lesser extent, and some other guys in Europe. But I think if you look at what we have and what we have accomplished, I think we have done well. But then again, we're the kind of people, we believe in winners. If you take, for example, sidetrack a little and Doc will back me up on this. If you're in the 100 meter, the Olympics, and you come 8th, you're the 8th fastest woman or man in the world, but that don't make no sense to me. You have to win. And when we say win, it's not silver or bronze. It's strictly gold. But I think if you look at where we're at, based on what we have achieved, because you see, the fact that we went to a World Cup already, you're always going to be judged based on that kind of achievement. And so everybody expects that you're to go to the next World Cup. As Doc said, I think too much of our football is concentrated into the school league, where the emphasis is on look at a Champions Cup. You play for $2 million in the Red Stripe Premier League, the National League, and you win the Champions League. As a schoolboy team, you win $1 million. So you want to look at the structure in terms of more development has to go into the clubs, and the clubs too must understand that they too have to put back money into the infrastructure of their clubs to make it better. If you look at the clubs, many clubs in the Red Stripe Premier Leagues, the top club, Portmore United, defending champion, they don't have a playing field. Yet if you look at what they have earned in terms of transfers over the years, so where is the mindset? Are we serious about the development of football, or are we just into the quick fix? And what we have to also understand, what happened in 97, 98 can't work now. It's a different dynamic now. So there are some basic things, and as Doc said, we have to look at the grassroots level. You have to look at a system that identifies the player's talent early, but you're not going to just develop an international player only by football.
Yeah, man, before you get there though,
yeah.
If I heard you correctly, you're saying that we've done well, or we've been doing well.
Based on who you're comparing us with.
Yeah, but I mean,
because we tend to want to compare Jamaica with a Brazil or Germany, England.
But even if you don't compare Jamaica to a Brazil, Germany, England, and so on, at some point, I think people want to see us get very close to that point that we were at in 1998. And people would have expected that since 1998, we probably would have made it to at least one World Cup since. But we don't see where that has happened. And then we were probably in doubt for the next World Cup in 2022.
Because we never really built on 98, Because what happened, 98 really wasn't really even started from the grassroots,
It was not.
There are core players that were here, talented to an extent. You bring in a Simoes who brought something different. We structured the thing a particular way. However, what did we, and We went to an under-17 World Cup, an under-20 World Cup during that period, but none of those players really transitioned into
the
next level. So what we are not doing, we're not looking at the developmental stage of the football, because what happens is that once you see that and you can identify that talent, you must have a space where you put them in, where they are consistently developed, trained. So you look at them nutrition, you look at them technical competence, you look at even them educational, development. Because even we talk about academies here locally, but one of the regulation, the FIFA regulation as it speaks to academies, that you must provide two things: football and education. Now, if you have a youth in school and you say 40% to play football, you're not really developing the youth academically, or what is in the schools that develop that young man technically. So we have to look at seriously the grassroots, and then from the grassroots, because even if you look at last statistics that came out of the under-17 World Cup, not the last World Cup, the one before, what it speaks to is that at least 3.1% of those players are players who transition to the senior level. So if you're not consistently having a good under-17 program, you're not going to have that number of players matriculating to the other levels. We start to look at, want to bring, and then there are some things that are so wrong, because you hear we talk, say, the national program not developing players. Players don't develop at the national program.
All right, so but on that note then, Dr. Wright, earlier when you were saying making that parallel or the sequence where we have them in school and we take them out of school, were you suggesting then that maybe if we see that someone has the attributes to be a great football player, we cater to that side and maybe just focus on that instead? I'm not sure if that's what you were saying. Instead of academics, let's just focus on them being football players.
We have identified a 7 to 10-year-old with the requisite skills that our experts believe that if you develop these skills, we have a potential World Cup, a potential professional footballer, okay? You can't then take him out of that and put him in school. You have to move him into an academy where you look at his education and his football, which is something that I was hoping Mount Pleasant would start to do, in where they have provided scholarships for people with football skills to come and live in the academy while attending school. Now, that is the sort of template that we need. And then that child having the football nous with the skill sets around him and the educational input at a side from the academy, then that is where you concentrate. And as Mr. Simpson was saying, I can call him Roy.
Yes,
as Roy is saying, then that set now will then develop into your under 14, your under 17, your under 20, your Olympic group, and then into your skill set. So you have to look at football from that level and move from that level. We are not doing that, and we are hopping and skipping and jumping.
So you don't believe that there are school programs that can accommodate that academics and football?
No, sir. The school is not for that. And what they have done with school, with recruiting, is that in order to win, you just go and develop and find skill sets, bring them together for 113 and win and congratulate the coach. That coach didn't do anything. He got 9 or 10 people from different areas that he identified, brought them into one thing and then won. Nobody develops football like that or develops footballers like that, because once the competition is over, the Manning Cup and the Costa Cup, those go on. And you lose them. And as Roy is saying, that's it. Instead of winning, we got to World Cup in under 17 and under 20, and none of those guys play for us now. None.
A matter of fact, Aileen Whittaker, the goalkeeper, was voted the top goalkeeper of the World Cup, the under 17 World Cup that he played in. What happened after that?
You can't develop football like that. And Andre, all we want is for somebody in Jamaica to just understand how you plan this thing, how you do this thing, and have the capital and the goodwill of everybody in football to move forward.
We have to take a break, but it sounds like that's something the JFF should probably undertake.
Absolutely.
All right, so when we come up, we'll talk about the role that the JFF has in developing football in this country. Stay with us.
Our slogan says we are the people's station, and for more than 10 years, PBCJ has been providing unique content to this growing market. Let us show you how we can serve you. We are small compared to our competitors, but it's our size that gives us the ability to dedicate ourselves to our clients. We move your project from concept to completion, keeping our activities in-house so we can make decisions in a timely and efficient manner. We have a creative, energetic, and youthful team ready to take your ideas to the next level. So what can we do for you? PBCJ has mastered the art of feature presentations, studio interviews, and PSAs. We also stand ready to create content for your social media platforms and make your message accessible anywhere, anytime. We also provide streaming for your conferences, seminars, and workshops. And guess what? You don't have to break the bank because our fees are some of the most competitive in the market. And just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we air it free. You heard right. We air it free for you. So call the PBCJ at 876-754-7225 or email us at production@pbcjamaica.org. We are waiting to serve you.
Welcome back to Public Interest. We're talking about why we're not better at football since we seem to love the sport so much. And we have with us in studio Roy Simpson, team manager, Jamaica Football Federation, and Dr. Paul Wright. He's a sports medicine specialist. And before we went on break, we were talking about all these grand things that we need to do to be better at football. And I said to you that it seems that the JFF has a role to play in all of this. So why isn't the JFF playing the role that it has to play? Why?
I think the JFF has been playing a role, to be fair to us. I think, though, what we need to look at, for example, what we need to look at is that, okay, so you look at the 98 framework where you selected some elite players and you brought them into camp and you trained them and then you allowed them to go and play for their respective clubs and then you come back into camp. So what we need to do is that, okay, so we keep to not identifying especially our age group players early enough. Too often we send out coaches and when they come back from tournaments, they say they never get enough preparation time. Yeah. So we need to look at that. So what you need to look at, so you need to look at your under 10s, who will matriculate to your under 12s, and your under 12s who will matriculate to your under 15s, your under 15s go 17, your 17s go 20, your 20s go under 23s, and then from that you go to seniors. I don't think we're spending enough time in doing that kind of scouting and recruiting. And what we need to understand too, at the JFF is that we have to understand that we need to, just as always scouting players, we have to get the best talent, coaching talent that we have in the country, get them on a retainer basis where what they do is solely prepare national teams. Because what you're having is that because the coaches, we're not paying them enough money, you have a coach in doing 3 jobs. Mm-hmm. So you don't get the kind of commitment that you want from them. But it's just how we structure in terms of how we look at our age group programs. We scout early, identify the talent early, get them into a kind of academic kind of situation where they are constantly being coached. Because some of the times you see some of the youngsters even manning cup, the Costa Cup, you see them try some stuff that they see on TV, not understanding that those guys that they see on TV, that's their job. They do it day in, day out. So what we have to do is to get them in that kind of frame that they're constantly being taught the technical aspects of the game where, for example, today we're just going to free kicks. Tomorrow we're just going to look at defensive plays, how we transition from defense to attacking plays. Where, you know, you bring them in that kind of atmosphere where it is just football. Because what has happened is that if you bring in some kids for a week, and you carry them through those technical sessions and you probably do some social activities with them. Remember, you know, when them go back to them respective domiciles, all of that, you know.
Out the window.
Out the window. Because, you know, when a youth come into national camp and them go back to him in community and man say, you are national, you're the greatest thing on earth. Mm-hmm. So him forget, say, he's still at that, you know, developmental stage. Yeah. And then him turn this superstar. Mm-hmm. So we need to have a structured program, again, that identifies the youngsters from a grassroots level right? And we constantly have them, teaching them, and preparing them. It's the only way.
So is that imminent then? If you've identified this as the problem,
it has been. We have been doing it, but what I'm saying, it is not. I don't believe it has been done in a structured way, or each respective program is given the amount of time that is needed
but if you're
to
not
prepare.
if you're not doing it in the structured way, the way it's supposed to be done, it's almost like you're not doing it, right, Dr.
Because we at the JFF has bought into this thing where you can select under 17 youth from Manning Cup and the Costa Cup.
It can't work. The worst thing that happened to Jamaica football was the way in which we qualified for the World Cup. It's the worst thing. What Rennie Semoyes and Captain Burrell did of blessed memory, what they did was they got together and identified people of Jamaican descent playing football at the highest level, coerced them into coming, formed a team that won. Now that winning portrayed Rennie Semoyes and Captain Burrell as giants. So they now had a job to do to replicate what was done in '98, and that can't work. You have to develop the footballer in Jamaica. And then what Roy is saying, and then you start from the under 10 and carry him up. So what has been happening since that, because of the success of the '98 template, that we kept doing it every year.
Andre, let me make this point to you. When you go to a prep school athletic championship, and you see that under 12, under 10 youth in a relay, from that tender age, they are exposed to the technical aspects of the relays, how they go in their blocks. So they leave prep school, right? They go to high school.
The same thing.
They spend at least 2 years in each respective classes. So the development of that athlete, he has more time, he has been exposed to more technical coaching. In football, you don't have that. You don't have that kind of obvious structure. And that is what we need. And you come back to another point where we're saying at the JFF you're not doing it. Technically, it is not so much the JFF to do that, because remember, the JFF is the governing body who facilitates these kind of programs. Development is at the club level. But what we at the JFF should be doing is implementing these policies that compels people to operate in a particular way that feeds into our national development plan. And I don't think we are at that place yet.
One of the bad things that happened to me is that I was trained in sports medicine in East Germany. Now, when we went to East Germany, they had a thing called a Spartakiad, which is just like our championships and our football, where they have all these teams, children playing. At the end of the Spartakiad, they take out the winners, and then those children don't go back home. Those children are then taken by the state, the nutrition, the workout, the medical, what are you good at? If you win 100 meters and when they finish with you, they think that you should be a shot putter. You're going to be a shot putter, or you're going to be a footballer. And that is what they do. And as a result of that template, East Germany conquered the whole world in every sport. They went World Cup, they went hockey, they went swimming, they went track and field. That is what you have to do. But that is a kind of thing that we don't have in the Western world, because you cannot take away a child from the parents and develop him as a sports person while educating him as well. We can't do that.
Yeah, but we're in an era now where people are recognizing that there is life in this business, in this business sport. So you can't.
It behoves us to do it, but we're not doing it, Andrew. We're not doing it.
Is it a money thing?
Academies.
Is it because we don't have money? Because we can talk about academies, but if you don't have the money to put that in place, because the JFF doesn't have the money, in fact, they're asking for money now. But so how do you build these academies?
But you know what, Andre? We tend to say we don't have the money.
You see, ballers have money. Ballers have money. You see what they are doing.
It's not so much the money.
You does with their youth team.
It's not the money.
So it's not a money thing.
No. And then based on our athletic accomplishment over years, you have people in other countries that will partner with you, you know, because they know that right here, you know, has an amount of talent. So it is, again, it comes back to, okay, if you look at even, for example, having a football festival in terms of getting all the youngsters. So you say, okay, the JFF says, okay, each parish has a festival for grassroots. After each parish has that festival, we are going to select the best youngsters, bring them to a national pool. Not everybody who has been selected, you know, will make that transition, you know. You know, you select a 12-year-old, probably when he reach 15, he decides I'm going to play cricket or something.
Or I'm going to be a DJ.
Absolutely. But it's just that, you know, the structures are not there to capture the talent. And that is the focus. And another thing,
I find it fascinating that you're saying the money is not the problem, because generally when you mention academies and feeding people, nutritional
academies, it is being done by individual academies.
Yeah.
It is being done.
Yeah.
So you were going to another point.
No. Why I say it can't be money? You have Manning Cup and the Costa Cup schools that spend over 30 million a season. You know. Easy. Easy. Manning Cup coaches are even paid higher, some of them, than Premier League coaches.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? How now does a club gets that core, probably alumni that supports a particular school? We understand the intimacy and how we can identify with our particular alma mater. But how does a club get that kind of money to be channeled into what they're doing? Are the clubs operating in a particular way that makes what they are doing successful? If I can say to Andre and Doc, listen, I have the greatest talent over there, but I need some support. This youth, at the end of preparation, can be sold to Liverpool for £15 million. No.
All right, so
that's a major investment. But how do you bring those people into the fold?
Let me tell you another aspect.
That's to be quick, 2 minutes left.
Quick, that I want to think. This thing of merchandise. We don't understand merchandise in Jamaica. I know a lot of people who like Waterhouse, who like Malines, who like this. But they can't go into downtown and buy a Maline shirt. Or they can't go down there and buy a Maline's cap or a Maline's umbrella. So that they now identify with a team in their community that whether they're doing well or not, you know. Because I know people who still love Arsenal, which is not you don't know how they do it, but they still wear the Arsenal shirt. That is how you start. And that is how you earn. You're earning money at the time while developing among the people around you something to look forward to for your club. And therefore the club support is now going to come from merchandising. We're not doing that.
all right, so if you were to list 2 things to be done over the next couple of years, what would those 2 things be?
In terms of development, we have to look at a serious grassroots program, and we have to let clubs understand that the development starts with them and it doesn't rest in schools.
Okay.
Clubs. The clubs and academies is where development takes place, not school.
Okay. All right, thank you both. All right, and that will do it for this edition of Public Interest. Thank you for watching. On behalf of the entire production team, please have a good evening.